First of all, this subject tonight has reference to the deepest part of our work, and one that is so fundamental that we're going to have to do a lot of thinking about it. I will start by telling you this, that from the earliest part of my healing experience, the thing that separated my work from Christian Science healing work, and incidentally, the thing that made my work so successful that I became nationally known as just a nothing but a simple CS practitioner, and yet gained national recognition in that field, came about because I had a secret that was not generally known. And since then, I find out that nobody in the rest of the metaphysical world knows it at all. And the secret was this: that error is not your fault. The sin isn't in you. The wrong thinking isn't in you. It makes no difference if you are envious or jealous or malicious or sensual. There's no difference if you're robbing banks or committing adultery. It makes no difference what the degree of your sins. The fault is not yours. All error has its foundation in the universal mesmerism. Now, Paul called that the carnal mind. He even acknowledged that while I don't sin, I have a sense of sin in me. But it isn't I. So it is that regardless of what erroneous thing we may feel, urge, temptation, false desire, it is not I. It is a universal hypnotism of which I am the victim. I'm not responsible. I'm not the cause. I'm the victim. It's using me in my ignorance. And so it was I discovered that Paul speaks of it as the carnal mind, which is enmity against God. And Mrs. Eddy called it mortal mind. She said the sum total of all error is mortal mind. But then she said mortal mind is a nothingness. Now then, if the sum total of all error is mortal mind, it's certainly not a man or a woman or a child. And whatever our errors must be, they must be mortal mind acting through us. And so, at no point in my practice did I ever say, you must do this, or you must not do this, or you ought to read 20 pages today to get healed, or you ought to be more generous, or you ought to be more thoughtful, or you ought to be kind, or you ought to be pure. Never. Never. I never touched a patient. I never once tried to correct them or improve them, but always pointed out that they were victims of so-called mortal mind, that is, of the universal mortal illusion. Today we call it the mind of flesh, the mind of man, the carnal mind, mortal mind, the arm of flesh, by which we're to understand that we mean nothingness. That only which is power because we give power to it. Do you see that? Now, that has been the major secret of my healing work. Spiritual living is something a little different. while always that's the basis for that particular part of it, the real secret of spiritual living is the discovery that the I is God, and therefore it has within itself all that the Father has. And therefore I don't have to look to person, place, or thing for anything, supply, recognition, anything. I carry it with me in the infinite invisible, and it's part of my own being. It comes through others, but if it weren't first in me, then it couldn't come through them. But in the healing work, the thing that has accomplished the most for me is the fact that I know no such thing as condemnation for any person. I know no such thing as criticism. So far as I'm concerned, it would make no difference if they stole wallets. It is not their fault. They are victims of this universal intelligence, and by knowing it, the nothingness of the mind of flesh or the man of flesh, that nothingizes it, because what has given its power is calling it you and then fearing it. Now, you can well understand that it was only because of that tremendous success that all of this evolved. And as you've seen the success of this around the globe, you know that it can only be evolving because somebody's benefiting. You can't tell me that this whole country's crazy, and Europe and all the rest of it. If they were not receiving some benefit from this work, they'd have been off this path long ago. Whatever benefit they're getting comes right from that. That I can sit in any room, I can go out here to the prison, and not have in my consciousness one single trace of condemnation. Knowing that there's no such thing as a sinner, there are people with a sense of sin who haven't learned how to meet it and overcome it. And they never will while there's a belief of good and evil. Now, the troublesome part of this, to me, has been that I have always had a certain percentage of people who did not respond to my work. Either they didn't get a full and complete healing, or they got so little benefit or healing out of it that I could see that their contact with me was a waste of their time. I just was getting nowhere with them, and for no reason that you could put your finger on. I wasn't to blame, surely, because I was being as consecrated with them as I was with anybody else. It wasn't their fault, because on their part they were doing whatever they were expected to do. They studied, they read, they did this, they did that. But that percentage just couldn't respond. And so the suspicion came to me that there is something so deep in their individual consciousness that a healing is not going to take place until it's uncovered and they give it up, which many people aren't capable of doing, because we're all so certain that we are right and justified and so forth. And then, as my attention was drawn to, first of all, these baby cases, mongoloid, blue babies, paralyzed babies, so forth and so on. And the few cases that came to me were never met. I'm speaking still now, back in the early days. Never met one of those cases in the early days. The suspicion was born in me that perhaps they have brought this over from a previous existence, and it is so deeply rooted in them that it can't be met. Or they've brought it over from a previous existence, and It may be that it can be met, but it would have to be with hard work over a protracted period of time. And at different times I've experimented, but evidently never long enough to heal one of those cases. All the time that this goes on in my mind, remember, I don't like it, because it argues against what I have said, that the error is never personal, that it is their mental illusion, and that it has to be met in that direction. And so 3 times in the last 10 years, I've started small groups like ourselves with the idea that if we worked for these cases 7 days a week, and maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 of us doing it, 2 or more gathered together, and there's certainly no selfish motive about it, that perhaps we could break some of these cases, and thereby prove that it isn't a matter of something brought over from the last incarnation that can't be worked out, but actually just something else that can be worked out in the universal. Now, in these last few years, the little success that I've had gives me no answer, because I still don't know what it was that healed him any more than I know about any other case, because my healing work has been on the same basis as it always has been, and so I don't know now. I still have no answer to that problem. But many years ago, in one of my meditations, I had a revelation that most physical disease is caused by improper foods, malnutrition and so forth. And when that came to me, it came as a shock, because certainly in the United States we're supposed to be the best fed people in the world. And then it was that I discovered after that that's not true. We are not the best fed people in the world, for the simple reason that more than half of the food we eat has no food value. Now, many years ago it was proven to us that nothing that is made from flour has food value, that every flour product is nothing but clay. It's made from the husk of the wheat, not from the kernel, and every bit of life is gone out of it, and then on top of it is added the poisonous preservative, so that anybody in this country who eats bread, cakes, pies, hot cakes, biscuits, donuts, is just putting into their stomach lumps of dough that fills up space, but leaves them just as hungry as they were, because a half hour later they want more to eat. As soon as that lump has gone down, they're hungry again, because all the lump did was fill that space. It did not feed the body. And so you can find in this country children in school suffering from malnutrition, children who are eating a loaf of bread a day. Now, a couple of months ago, nobody's brought suit against the magazine yet that we've heard, it is published that there isn't a dry cereal made in this country that has any food value in it. That it too is nothing but lumps of clay going into the system with poisonous preservative in it. And the only food is what little vitamins they pump into it for advertising. Certainly not enough to feed the body, nor would they have to pump vitamins in if it had food value. So that there is a branch of materia medica today which is working from the standpoint of foods, and they are healing a lot of disease merely by taking people off of flour products and substituting the flour products that come from health food stores and vitamins to make up what they should be having. Now we learn that there is a doctor experimenting with vitamins on what? These baby cases? Mongoloid babies, and having success. And here, that's one of the things that karma has been blamed for.
That's retarded children, I think they're using it. And Cretan children's thyroid, which is
So, here you have it, that what has been called karma, or maybe they committed suicide in the last incarnation, or something of that kind, now they're fixing up with vitamins. Now, we don't know how far that's going to go, but I have a good conviction that it's going to go far, because I'm still convinced that most of the disease in this country is caused by deficiencies in foods, because of the way we fill up with pies and stuff that are not substantial. All right. I'm going into this at length because it's important. If these baby cases came in because of some terrible karma in their past existence that they have to work out, we couldn't do anything for them. Yet we are beginning to do something. And neither could these doctors with vitamins do something for them. And they are doing something for them. So it brings me closer and closer and closer to my original revelation on healing. That error is not power regardless of its form. And even if there's a belief of karma, it still came out of the mind of flesh, because karma didn't come from God. There's no law of punishment in God. So even karma had to come out of the law of flesh. Do you see that? Now, this is a letter from one of our group saying, I have just had a strange and incredible flash about those 7 cases we are handling. Specifically, it came through one of the children, and it said, you cannot fight nature and win. Like produces like. Somewhere along the line, unnatural consorting has taken place and produced an abomination unto the Lord, and not one jot or tittle shall pass from the law till all shall be fulfilled. We can only bring the Christ to bear here in the form of a return to pure consciousness. Now, this would leave you hopeless. And it can't be that anything's impossible to God. I believe it's true on the same human level that says if you sit in a draft you'll catch cold, or if you don't eat the right foods you'll get rheumatism. I believe it's true that if on the physical level, that if you don't eat the right foods, and you can open yourself to any disease. But I do not believe that any of it is true when it touches the spiritual ministry. That's what I want you to see. That whether it is a claim of malnutrition through bad eating, or whether it is a claim of disease through karma, or whether it is a disease through an accident, or a disease through out and out what the world calls sin, venereal disease and the like. What we have to see is that it is no more effective in one way than another, because where did all those laws come from? The law came from Moses. The law came from the human mind. The law came from the carnal mind. The law came from the mind of flesh, which is enmity against God. And in the mind of God, every single one of these things that I have described tonight is the mind of flesh producing the arm of flesh. So if there's a blue baby, or there is a twisted baby, or there is a deformed baby, or if there is a grown-up with cancer, or if there's someone that got it through karma, or if there's someone that got it through indiscriminate sexual diseases and one thing and another, or activities. Regardless of its name or nature, it has its foundation in the mind of flesh, the carnal mind, which is enmity against God. Only it isn't enmity against anything because it's nothing. It has no power. There is neither good nor evil in the carnal mind. And when it's at its best, it's the carnal mind made manifest. Now, unless we return to that original vision that brought me to wherever we are at this particular point in our world unfoldment, and cling tenaciously to the fact that this that we see, hear, taste, touch, or smell is the arm of flesh. And where does it come from? The mind of flesh. And what do we do about it? What Jesus did. Put a little spittle on it. Show it the utmost contempt. And spittle represents utmost contempt. If spittle will heal it, it can't amount to much. And so it is. Our outlook on life in our healing ministry has to be based completely on, I don't care if it is karma. I don't care if it is malnutrition. I'm not trying to change a picture of the carnal mind. I am beholding the mind that was in Christ Jesus appearing as individual being. I'm not trying to see a well human being. I'm trying to see the Christ of God made evident. You see, if only you live enough in the human world, you can get trapped beautifully until you never can heal. Because before you get through with a karmic disease that's hopeless, and a medical disease that's hopeless, and an accident, the results of which are hopeless, and a sin that's hopeless, all of a sudden you're left with nothing but curing colds and bad dispositions. But it isn't true. There's nothing impossible with God. Now, strangely enough, this does not mean that we can walk into a hospital and empty it out. I will go back again and repeat to you. And you can watch it when you see 10 Commandments, Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments. The Hebrews, for hundreds of years, are slaves under Pharaoh. And Pharaoh was a hard taskmaster. They were beaten, they were starved, they were horribly mistreated, and they were mocked over and over again for their worship of the one true God. Well, where is this God? What does he do for you? Let you be our slaves? Let us beat you all we want? Let us starve you all we want? Where is this great God? You love him so much, how he doesn't love you? And you know that for all those centuries, God did really nothing about the Hebrews. Nothing. And they were probably better at that time, much better than they were later when they were with Moses. Because at least they were holding to their faith and seeing no evidence of it. Whereas later, after they saw evidence of it with Moses, they went back on their faith. Now, somewhere miles and miles and miles away, Moses has an illumination. And this light which he received made of him a transparent transparency. I think he worded it this way. He said that you have to be like glass. You have no God power of your own, but you're like glass, and the power and the light of God shines through you. We call that being a transparency or an instrument for God. But once he became a transparency through which God could operate, God could reach the Hebrews. And he not only reached the Hebrews, but what he did to those Egyptians. Why, God just made fools of them at every direction. All their vaunted power was mocked with an unarmed Moses. Well, there are so many instances of that throughout the Bible, of the great things done by Isaiah, Elijah, Isaiah, Joel. And all it was the same thing. The people were in trouble, and God was doing nothing about it. Nothing. God couldn't break through. Because God can only break through the consciousness of an individual. But if the light of God can come through one individual, everybody who has brought themselves under that influence can benefit by it. Because the light is so infinite that it'll shine right out all over this place, touching only those who are open to it. So it is. Truth is truth, but that does not make it demonstrable. All the truth that we have about electric lights and phonographs and so forth was true long before there was a Thomas Edison or an Alexander Graham Bell or a Morse or anybody that brought these modern inventions to us. But how could they break through until there was a consciousness reaching out for them? So it is with this. There is a God, and this is the thing that would shock the world. But God can't help this universe except through the consciousness of individuals. Do you see that? You could have a person lying here dying, and God does nothing about it. Let the person come in with metaphysical experience or spiritual power, and the person gets up well. Where was God before that happened? It's a shocking thing, isn't it? But you have to make up your mind to it that that's the truth. That all over this world there are people from babies up to the others dying. In the midst of all the need for a strong president in the United States, he gets stricken with disease 3 times. A religious man, a church man, a believer. But he gets stricken. What's the answer to all that? It doesn't mean there isn't a God. There is a God. But God only breaks through when consciousness is opened and one becomes a transparency for God. That doesn't mean intellectually knowing about God. Intellectually knowing about God is only the first steps, maybe necessary ones, but the first steps leading up to the dissolving of the carnal mind in us, to the point where the mind of God can get through, the light of God, the Spirit, and the presence of God. In the days of Jesus Christ, according to the New Testament, he healed, he raised them from the dead, he fed them. Where was God without Jesus Christ? And did nobody of those days mean anything to God but that one man? Certainly not. God means nothing, nobody means anything to God. No mortal, no human being means anything to God. He doesn't care if it's 4th of July and 600 want to go out there and get killed. And they may all be needed to support families and everything else. It doesn't faze God. It doesn't faze God if 250,000 people get wiped out with an atomic bomb. It doesn't faze God if tonight 1 million men are lying drunk in this country. Doesn't bother God one bit. Doesn't lift its finger. Let an individual come on the scene with this light of God, with this transparency, and then all these errors begin to disappear. The sick walk again. Now, all of this means this: sin, disease, and death will go on forever unless the consciousness of humanity is opened to the spiritual impulse. Wherever an individual appears, in their vicinity there will be healing. But that will not be the ultimate saving of those that are healed, for they themselves must go and do likewise. Otherwise, no matter what they're healed of this week, they'll need another healing next week, next month, or next year. You see that? And you haven't changed the picture one bit. Now, all of this means this: whether it's a whole nation that's enslaved, or whether it's a whole body of laborers enslaved to union heads, or another whole group enslaved to a church, they can't be freed until somebody is accepted in their midst with the light. That will be their temporary freedom. But what has happened to the Hebrew race after Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Isaiah, Elijah, Elisha, Jesus, John, and Paul, that they can all get burnt up in Hitler's furnaces? That's a mystery. They didn't learn the lesson from any of their masters. And because they're still in ignorance, they still pay the same penalty. Had they had one in their midst that they could accept with a spiritual light, they could have been saved. There would have been an exodus from Germany, as there was an exodus from Egypt. But there wasn't one enlightened soul in their midst. Or if there was, not one enlightened soul who was accepted. There has to be acceptance as well as the light. Now, to be a transparency for spiritual healing power, there must be no distinction in your mind between ignorance, sin, fear, disease, karma, or any other cause. You have to see every one of those as the arm of flesh emanating from the mind of flesh, and then throw a little spittle at it. Watch out that you do not accept the subtle suggestions that there is some power that can operate to prevent God acting. The only power there is human ignorance, or density, materialism, not letting the light come through. If you can be a transparency for healing, it makes no difference what it is. You still will hold to the mind of flesh. Now, I've proven this in the 90% of healings that take place regardless of what the cause was. I haven't proven it in the 10%, in which we are still working, for we have not yet completely seen that picture, although we are seeing it in part. And this week we saw it in part again when the strike was ended. How? Not by changing men, not by condemning evil men, and not by calling evil men spiritual ideas. but by ignoring men and realizing that anything they appeared to be, and the cause of anything that they ever appeared to be, was nothing but that carnal mind made flesh. The mind of flesh, the arm of flesh, nothingness. And realizing that power doesn't emanate from the mind of flesh. There is no power except the power of the mind that was in Christ Jesus, which is the power that maintains and sustains its own creation. And so we see that nullified. Well, we are having a grain of proof, but what we are after is actually witnessing not sick people made well, but the very evidence of the Christ made manifest, the Word made flesh. And it is to that we have to dedicate ourselves, or else we ourselves will degenerate into accepting the belief, oh, well, there's some things we can heal, let's be satisfied with that. And that we can't do, because that will shut us off from the light. To God all things are possible. Yes, but I have to be a transparency for God. Therefore, if there's no God in this room, it's my fault. As a man of earth, I'm blocking it out just as much as if I boarded up these windows and blocked out the light. And the light can't get through, although it's there, until those boards are removed. Whatever it is that acts in our consciousness as a block, as materialism, sensualism, greed, hate, lust, whatever it is that's acting in our consciousness that prevents this light of God coming through, we have to work with to realize its nothingness. It may be that we have to take for our basic mantra, call no man on earth your father, for one is the Father which is in heaven. Until we've actually brought ourselves to the realization that I am not humanly born, not humanly conceived or humanly born, that I am, pure spirit. And if I can get that clearly enough, I rule out. Sometimes it takes drastic action, like shutting the door on yesterday. If you keep on thinking of your human history, you never reach it, because there's so much in our human past to convince us that we're not pure spiritual beings, that if we're going to cling to that picture, we never will be. Unless we can completely die to yesterday, and each day declare our Christhood now, with no regard for what we did yesterday, last year, last month. Each day claim that Christhood and keep that humanhood out, we will not achieve being the transparency. Once Moses had that light, no sign of his past came back into his experience. He just didn't bring it up. It had nothing to do with him. Whether it was the part of being the prince at court with his successors, or whether it was the part afterward where he was a slave and a failure, none of that came back into his life. He was now Moses, the enlightened one. So, that's what I had to say to you. I don't ever want to forget the main point that made my whole career in science, and that has taken this around the world. I just go around so convinced that those things that operate in human thought as the cause of disease isn't cause. It's an effect. It's an effect of the carnal mind, which is nothing. The arm of flesh, the mind of flesh, nothing. And only on that basis can we go forward and increase it. And this brings us now to the strangest part of the whole thing. That so far as healing work is concerned, you can't heal a single thing with everything that's been said on that tape. That is the terrible part of the entire situation. That even though we know that, and even if we were to declare it in a treatment, it still is not power, and it still will not heal. And there again, you see how the mind of man is not power. With all of that truth, it will not do a thing. Unless we, through steadfastly abiding in that, are lifted up above even that, to where we are the transparency for the spiritual activity, knowing this isn't going to do us one single bit of good. Now the strange thing is that without this, you have very little chance of attaining sufficient spiritual consciousness to be able to heal. Because always in the back of the mind there will be the subconscious acceptance of a God doing something to disease. And you won't attain it. And it's only with the constant realization of this truth that we've uttered here tonight that keeps us in the atmosphere so that we can meditate without hoping that God through us is going to heal disease. Because now with this, we have no disease to be healed. All we want is God with us, Emmanuel. And so it is that in proportion as you can turn to God, as we can turn to God, without any desire for God to do anything or be anything, merely for the realization of that light, only in that degree can we be a sufficient transparency to watch all forms of error dissolve in our presence. Never forget that. One of the most puzzling things in the entire metaphysical field is how it can be that there are so many people who know the truth and nothing happens. And the reason is that they go no further than knowing the truth. And that is a mental activity. It's an activity of the human mind. It's human knowledge. Spiritual healing or regeneration takes place only in an absolute silence of the human mind, a stilling of the human mind. But it's a stilling that cannot be achieved as long as God is thought of as a power. That is why with even the most religious people in the world there's no spiritual healing. Why? Because they haven't the faintest concept of what God is. And so they're looking always, consciously or subconsciously, for some great experience or some great power that's going to do something to something. And it's like looking in a diamond mine for fish or looking in the ocean for diamonds. They're looking in the wrong place for what they're seeking. To be a transparency for God does not mean to be endowed with power to heal disease. To be a transparency for God means to have a conscious experience of God's presence. And then all of these appearances of the world, both the good ones and the evil ones, evaporate. It isn't that only the evil ones evaporate. It's that the good and the evil evaporate. And it's because of that that so many people lose their demonstration. They are trying to see the evil evaporate and hold on to the good. They lose their whole demonstration. It is, as one man put it, I want to be healed, but please don't stop my smoking, because that I want to keep. Yes, that is a brazen way of saying what almost everybody else is saying. Certainly I want to be healed of this disease so I can go back and do all the things that I want to be doing, take care of my family, or make another fortune, or do this or do that, or paint more. Surely. It isn't that they want God for God's sake. They want to be healed of the errors of their existence so they can start in some other human form of good. And you see, that's where it misses. It misses fire. You can't have a single idea in your whole head as to what the realization of the Christ will do. Now, we do know that the Master said, leave your nets, and he stopped them from fishing. And fishing was their livelihood. Well, you know what would happen to us if we said to our people, throw up your jobs and follow me? No, what they would like is a treatment that would increase the productivity of their jobs. Now, no one in the face of the globe has any way of knowing what effect the activity of the Christ will have in their lives. It may not give them the physical health they expect, because it may be the very struggling out of ill health that will help them attain their demonstration. It may not give them the financial affluence they expect, because that may be the very worst thing for them at that particular time. Maybe that may not be their mode of life. No one has a way of knowing what effect the activity of the Christ will have when it touches one. And yet, every day, our students are all supposed to be turning inward for the realization of the activity of the Christ. Yes, but the minute it begins to take some human form of good away from them, they howl. They've got a problem. Why is it that the minute I started studying this, I started getting problems? I didn't have them before. Well, certainly, if you're grounded on the physical sense of health or the physical sense of wealth, and you have the activity of Christ, it's going to knock that right over. And then you have to begin to understand what is the spiritual health and what is spiritual supply, until eventually that unfoldment comes. It's the cry in the Daily Mail. Pray for me for health. Pray for me for supply. Pray for me for companionship. Pray for me for a home. And even occasionally where they'll say, well, pray for the realization of God, but they, in the back of their minds, are thinking of the effect of that, and the effect they're thinking of is the removal of a human evil. Never are they thinking of it as a removal of a human good. And yet the activity of the Christ moves both. The way of the Christ is not a way merely of good humanhood. It is a whole new activity, a whole new experience, a whole new life, and it isn't like the old idea of demonstration that, well, now I have a Cadillac instead of a Ford. Maybe for a while we'll have a Ford instead of a Cadillac, or not even a Ford. But the point is that once you have this letter that you can work with, so that at least when you do sit down with the Christ, you're not thinking of it as a superpower that's going to remove the evils of the world. All of these people in the world today are praying for the overcoming of Russia, for communism. But won't they still be left with humanhood? Won't they still be left with an enemy somewhere else? Won't they still be left with, whether it's a religious domination or a labor domination or whatnot, won't they be left with something? Certainly. That they don't think of. somebody said recently that everybody's for the 4-day working week except the wives. Sure, what are they going to do with husbands around 3 days a week? They had enough 1 day, then 1.5 days, now 2 days. Pretty soon they're going to have them around 3 days a week. Well, sure will mess up the home. Keep that in mind, that you need every bit of the letter of truth. Not that it'll heal anything or do anything, but that it'll get you into an atmosphere where you don't expect it to do anything, and where you want nothing but the glory of the freedom of the Spirit. And then when you're at transparency, if it sends you to free the Hebrews or the Negroes or the Catholics or somebody else, you'll go out and do it. And again, like Moses, not by wielding power. Over and over he had to remind those people that he wasn't wielding the power, that he was a beholder. He was witnessing God. And you could see it all through there, couldn't you? That all he was doing is standing still, sometimes even wondering if it was going to happen. But just looking, waiting. And sometimes he was biting his lips when the last minute was coming along and it wasn't there. Well, I think that's it. We'll see for a minute.